What's up, everyone? Alex here, and welcome to my little corner of the internet. I wanted to talk about hard to name genders. Genders that are difficult to give a name to or a label to. And because of that, it's just the concept of hard to name genders. It is not finding genders that actually have names and they represent hard to name genders. Just the concept of like, I have this experience and I don't know what to call it. A lot of examples being genders that take a lot of explaining to like get the point across, like, hey, this is my gender, but like all these words, my gender is this and that and not this, and feels a little bit like that. A lot of like wordiness to explain one's gender rather than, having a specific one or two words in mind that can like convey that idea. Genders that don't have names at all, not that you haven't found it yet, but that just, there's no name for the experience at all. There's nothing out there that exists as a term that explains this particular experience. It doesn't even have to. Sorry if you hear my cat. He's singing in the hallway and I can tell that he's got the zoomies and he's probably going to start tearing ass through the hall and screeching because that's just what he does at 6 years old. He just thinks he's still a kitten, which is fantastic. I wish I had that kind of energy. It doesn't even have to be a specific gender experience. Sometimes it's just like, I'm some kind of non-binary and there's not a word for that. It doesn't have to be like, this is my alignment and the presentation that I prefer, and these are the things I don't want to be called, and this is what my gender feels like or can be comparable to. It doesn't even have to be anything really hyper specific like that. Sometimes it's just, I have this gender and I don't know what to call it. Sometimes there's genders that are hard to place. You've got proximal genders, which are genders that are typically close to the binary, but existing on a plane all their own. But there have been proximal genders that have been coined, gender terms. You don't coin genders, but you coin gender terms. Proximal gender terms that have been coined to express being close to even entirely abinary genders, close to maverick, but existing on its own, and it isn't actually maverick. Close to agender, but existing on its own plane and is not agender. There's a lot of genders like this that are proximal to another gender, and sometimes that kind of creates like I know where to place gender on the binary spectrum. I know like male, female, and then in between, and maybe leaning one way or the other, or combinations of both. But then if you're like in proximity to that, how proximal? Are you close to it? Are you really far away from it? Up, down, around it? Is there any overlap at all? So the idea of like, it's hard to place my gender in a specific spot. Sometimes it's hard to determine if maybe you're aligned with a gender rather than being close to a gender, or maybe you do actually have that specific gender in some kind of percentage. So, trying to figure out how much of that gender that you feel can be a hard thing to place and a hard thing to name. And then I wrote this or that gender confusion. I kind of like that wording. Basically, confused between two different gender options and whichever one feels most accurate. I don't know if I'm a man or if I am agender, and those are the two things that I'm weighing based on these observations of my own gendered feelings, and there isn't really a name for what you are if you can't figure out which of these two things that you are. There are genders that can be compared to abstract concepts, but they're not xenogenders. You can use abstract concepts to kind of explain where it is. My gender is kind of like a solar system with me at the center and all these planets orbiting. And some of those planets are just different sizes. They have different gravitational pulls, something like that. I can compare my gender to a specific color, teal, but maybe it's more green than it is blue, or like orange. It's a perfect blend of two ideas kind of thing, but it's not a xenogender. It's not like a color gender sort of thing. It's just I can use these abstract concepts to get the point across, and there's not a name for it, but there's a name for those abstract concepts. So you could use things like nature or space, animals, colors, sensations, feelings as in emotions, anything like that to kind of describe gender without being able to place a name for it. I wrote a gender that can only be compared to another gender but is not that gender. That's literally a proximal gender. I don't know why I put this here. There's also being almost every gender, but specifically not some of them. Similar to omnigender, a lot of people might not use the term omnigender. Omnigender is a pretty non-specific gender, I would say. It's a singular word for an experience that has so many different facets to it and so many varieties of experiences, because omnigender can mean you're everything but binary genders. It can mean that you are almost every single gender but none of the genderless ones, or almost every single gender but maybe not neutroid and maybe not epicene, like specific ones. It's almost an uncountable number of genders with some caveats to it. And maybe you don't know which ones are missing, so not necessarily missing, but which ones you're not. So it's like, I know that I'm omnigender. I know that I have almost every single gender. I just don't know which ones I'm not. So these could be specific experiences that are hard to give a name to. There's also being unsure if you even have a gender. Sometimes you might think you're a gender, but you're like just not sure. This falls into like the gray gender sort of spectrum. It's like I don't even know if I have a gender. I don't know if that gender's there. It's kind of hard to like pinpoint exactly what this feeling is. And that goes into the idea of a gender that is fleeting, something that's like, sometimes I feel this gender, but then it like kind of goes. It's very rare. It comes in and out. It's not quite fluctuations. It's more like a gentle heartbeat than a fluctuation of, I don't know, the thing that measures like tectonic activity, like big spikes of gender, which you would call gender flux. But this is more like there's a ripple in the water and then it's kind of gone. There's moments of stillness in between. So it's kind of hard to like figure out what exactly was happening there before it like fucked off and left somewhere. So all of these experiences can be just the experience of not being able to find a word for your gender. It didn't really have like a specific point. I wanted this to be a short video, just to kind of start the month off with like a particular topic in general. So just sometimes gender does this is basically what my point is. Sometimes gender just has these little quirks, these things that it can do where you're like, what was that? I don't even know what to call it. I can only describe it in these like 2 or 3 sentences, in these abstract concepts. I can compare this thing to other genders. That's all I can really do because I don't know exactly what it might be. I don't know if I'm going to do this very often, but I do have sort of a gender term of the week, or maybe a gender term of the month, something to look up to kind of learn more. It's called uingender, UIN meaning being unknown in nature, and sometimes it's a gender on its own, but it is also an umbrella term for genders that are unknown, unquantifiable, undefinable, unexplainable. All the U's like unknown in nature that you can be replaced with like another you word. It's meant to be very broad, and it encompasses genders that they do have a name, but they describe experiences of unknowingness. There's this gender, but then an unknown aspect. There's this experience, this alignment, this proximity to gender with this unidentifiable piece. So, being omnigender and not sure about some of those little pieces, there's probably a word for that. There's an idea for it for sure. But that's what uingender is meant to encompass, is the hard to name genders, the hard to place genders, the confusing and gray genders, and genders that just have an unknown aspect to them, whatever that may mean to the person. Basically, not everyone has the most precise or accurate language to describe their genders, and they don't always want to find that perfect label, that specific label to describe every single little aspect of their gender. And we should be welcoming people like this in our communities, of course. And I know a lot of spaces, they do welcome people who are questioning, but sometimes there's an implication that, like, if you're questioning, we got to find you something that you can call yourself. So there's this kind of push to use specific labels. Sometimes people, like, I've seen people post on Tumblr where it's like, I have this gender experience and I don't really know what to call it, but I feel okay calling myself blank, non-binary, gender fluid, femme, just like a presentation or expression term, like something that like isn't a particular gender. Or I feel fine calling myself a gender. Like sometimes people will throw like a word out and be like, I'm fine with this. I just don't exactly know what it is. And a lot of people are very quick to sort of come up with these labels that might fit the person, but that person didn't ask for specific labels, didn't ask for help in troubleshooting their gender. So I try to be aware of that as the guy who is obsessed with so many labels and obsessed with like finding labels that accurately describe me and my particular experiences. I try to be aware if there was not a question of like, hey, could you like help me figure out a term for this? Is there a word for this? If there wasn't that, then my go-to is to be supportive and being like, okay, like you call yourself agender, but you just like don't know for sure because of all these other aspects of your gender that kind of feel like it takes away from the agenderness of your identity. So I just try to be aware of that, and I encourage also being aware of that in especially in spaces where like micro labels are the thing. Newly coined labels are being discussed and subsets of larger labels are being discussed. It helps to just be aware of those who like, there's the questioning who are looking for a specific label, and then there are those who don't really need it. It's okay if they don't need it. There's nothing incomplete about their genders. There's no like gender, like it's uingender, it's unknown in nature. It is not incomplete in nature. It's not unfinished in nature. So that's what I try to be aware of. Personally, I find it a lot easier to use multiple labels to talk about my gender, from broader to more specific, but for others, they don't really need all those words. They don't really need anything that points to a very specific gender experience. Sometimes it's just, this is my gender, and maybe it can be compared to something else. Maybe it's similar to something else. Maybe I'm going to compare it to something else. That made me jump. My cat jumped on the washer and made a sound that echoed through the house. Probably scared my other cats. But yeah, like that's just sometimes how it is. When you're being inclusive, don't just be inclusive of all the specific labeled genders. Be inclusive of those who don't have labels, who don't want labels, or those who are questioning. Like all of them. People who are looking for labels, people who are not looking for labels. I think I come off as like I'm a little too obsessed with labels and I want to push that on people kind of thing. And I never want to come off as that, but like I feel like I'm always defending myself where it's like, yeah, I know you think that gender is my entire personality and that I'm trying to push all these new words, these newfangled words. My gosh, millennials complaining that there's too many new words. What decade are we living in right now? I think that's hilarious. But just I'm always defending myself against people who think that like I just want to push all these labels on people and all this other stuff. So I try to be aware, and at the same time, people just have their personal experiences and their preference for labels, and that's just all it is. I have to check on my cats. Someone is running around like a nut in my kitchen. And I'm going to go mow my lawn because that's the adult thing to do, I guess. It's like 90 degrees outside, so that's going to be fun to deal with. And I am signing off for now. See you later.